why is it we have so many millionaires and everything in the United States, and we still have so many impoverished people who try to get up into the world? Why is it we have this lack of money where people who can't support themselves decently and get a decent job, where all these big men are up on top making oodles and oodles of money? They don't need it. They can only eat that much, sleep in the bed.
And what do you suppose they do? If they don't eat it and don't use it, what do you suppose they do?
They hoard it.
And what do you mean they hoard it? You mean they put it under their pillows?
That's right. No, they keep investing it.
Investing it in what?
That's right, yeah.
What are they invested in?
Well, in oil and everything, where, I mean, all these other people who are
What are they invested in? Don't get off the subject.
No.
What are they invested in?
Well, they invested in a lot of different things that the little people need.
Well, do they invest it in factories?
Yes.
Does some of that money end up in machines?
Yes.
Do those factories and machines provide ordinary working people with jobs or not? What do you suppose the productivity of this country would be, and of the wage rate would be, if the total amount of capital in this country today was what it was 100 years ago? Where do you suppose the improvements in productivity come from, except from the investment by people of their savings? But let me go to your fundamental question. First place, nirvana is not for this world. There is no paradise. Of course we've got a lot of people who are poorly off. But if you look at it over time, if you get a sense of proportion, the well-being of the ordinary people has been the main thing that has been improved by economic progress and economic growth and development. And most residual hard cases of poverty today are the result, again, of a failure of government. Why do we have a black teenage unemployment rate in 30 to 40%? Because of two failures of government. One, a failure to provide decent schooling, which is a governmental responsibility. Has been, whether it should be or not, it has been. And second, because of a minimum wage rate, which prevents those kids who haven't had decent schooling from getting jobs at low pay at which they can earn the skills on the jobs that would enable them to rise to higher pay. If you look at the sources of poverty, you will find most of them are derived from what I regard as wrong-headed government policies.
Because the government sets a minimum wage, what does McDonald's do?
McDonald's? It can't hire as many teenagers. It improves its capital equipment to serve. It does less business because it has to charge higher hamburger prices. In the absence of a minimum wage, McDonald's would be able to offer a larger number of jobs to a larger number of youngsters, and they would be able to acquire some skills. And not only McDonald's.
So we hire more people get work. Younger people.
The younger people would work, and they'd get a chance to develop their skills to become productive members of society instead of being driven into a cycle of poverty and of welfare, which is absolutely deplorable. They should be free to choose whether they want to send their child to this school or that school or any other school. And the way to do it is to introduce a voucher scheme so that people can have freedom to choose. I am not in favor of compulsory busing. I am not in favor of compulsory integration. I am in favor of freedom.
What'd you say about voucher? The voucher what?
I would have a voucher system. You said I had to keep it brief, so I can only mention it. A system under which parents who chose not to send their child to a particular public school would be entitled to a payment like the GI Bill of Rights, a voucher which they could use at any school of their choice.
You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to open a school.
Very good.
And I'm going to hire an advertising agency.
Well, wonderful.
And I'm going to have cheerleaders saying, "Go to Donahue High," because it's got the best football team. And I'm going to get all these vouchers. And I'm going to have the biggest super school in the whole county.
Wonderful. Marvelous.
I don't know if it's wonderful.
If you can succeed, you cannot succeed by advertising what's not true. Ford Motor Company couldn't sell an Edsel that way, and I don't think even Phil Donahue could sell lousy education that way.
Yes.
You know, people think the public at large are a bunch of stupid people. They're not.
Doctor, is there anything the average citizen can do to protect himself from the ravages of the rising inflation?
Unfortunately, there is very, very little he can do. I hate to say this, and yet it's true. The most effective protection against inflation is high living.
How do you mean that? How do you mean that?
I mean that. Unfortunately, there are no assets which you can confidently acquire with the expectation that they will provide you a hedge against inflation. On the other hand, if you buy yourself a nice house, you buy yourself a nice suit, you buy yourself a picture to hang on the wall, you are protected against the ravages of inflation.
So, in other words, convert your money into material things?
Unfortunately, it's not a very desirable thing to do. Don't convert all of it. You've got to have some reserve for emergency. I'm not saying this is a good thing. I'm saying that inflation is the kind of thing which leaves you with no good choices.
But that sounds like playing the violin while Rome is burning.
Well, tell me the alternative. The question was not what the nation ought to do.
Yeah.
I have no difficulty in saying what our governmental policy ought to be to end inflation. That's a different question. The question is, what can I as an individual do? And unfortunately, given the uncertainty of inflation, given the fact that real estate has proved a good hedge and it's proved a bad hedge, that stocks have proved a good hedge and they've proved a bad hedge, that government bonds are a snare and a delusion, that they have proved a very, very poor investment for the poor suckers who were induced by Uncle Sam to come into them. Unfortunately, there is no good way in which the ordinary citizen, the ordinary person, can really protect his assets against inflation.
Dr. Friedman, I wanted to point out that a lot of people will agree that medical care costs are terribly expensive these days, and some hospitals that I know of, particularly in the South, have cost containment programs that are voluntary. Are these feasible? And if they are, why don't other businesses start them?
Well, in the first place, every business has a cost containment program. There is no business in this country that doesn't unless it's on the verge of bankruptcy. In the second place, in all of these questions, one shouldn't look at the symptoms. One ought to go back and ask what the sources are. The reason why medical costs have been rising so rapidly in the country is, again, I sing the same old tune, but it happens to be true. Because whereas some 15 or 20 years ago, government spending on medical care accounted for something like 10–20% of the total amount spent on medical care, that was mostly in public health and for veterans, today it amounts to something like 40% or more of the total spending, and that's what's been driving these prices up.
Since you do like Ronald Reagan, and let's say he wins the election and he chooses you as his chief economic advisor, what would you do to restore our economy back on the right track? And would you put us on a gold standard, or could you put us on a gold standard?
Well, you've asked three questions, and I'll try to answer all three of them. Number one, I have been offered the chairmanship of the Council of Economic Advisors in the past, and I have refused it, and I guarantee you I would refuse it again.
Because you feel that it's what? That you have something essential?
I believe that I personally can be more useful outside the government than I can inside. It's a very important job. There are many able people who can do the job. I don't believe that's the way I can use my abilities and my interests most effectively. I want to remain irresponsible. You see what I mean by that. If you're in that kind of a position, it's right and proper that you're part of a team, and if the team decides on something you don't agree with, you either go along with it or you quit. But I would rather stay on the outside where I can express my own views, and I believe I am more effective in that way than I personally would be inside the government. So I have no doubts about that. But number two, let me answer your second two questions. What measures should the government take to try to restore economic health to the United States? And I have very little doubt about what the major measures there. But let me say first, you're not going to do it overnight. We've gotten into our present pickle because of 3 decades of mismanagement of the economy. And we're not going to get out of it in 6 months. But what you have to do is, number one, you have to move to cut down government spending, to hold down the rate of growth of government spending in dollars and to cut it in terms of purchasing power. Number two, you have to have a restrained monetary policy. Not a shock treatment, not a real cut in the quantity of money, but to hold down and have a gradual reduction in the rate of monetary growth. Number three, you have to eliminate as many of the regulations that now bedevil the economy as you possibly can. The most important area there is the energy area. We have created the energy mess because of governmental intervention. The most effective measure we could take for both foreign policy and domestic policy would be to get rid of the Department of Energy, to get rid of this mislabeled windfall profits tax, to let the private enterprise economy go to work to produce the energy that we need. Now, on your last question, I do not believe it is either feasible or desirable to establish a gold standard under current circumstances. The gold standard served well in the 19th century. If you could restore the conditions of the 19th century, namely a situation in which federal government spending was 3% of national income, right, I'd be in favor of a gold standard.
I just don't believe that you can take away laws. I have children. If I don't tell them what to do and how to raise them, they won't know what we expect of them. I feel
there's nothing against you telling your kids what to do.
No, but I meant you compare the government to that, telling us what to do and deregulation and everything. I think we have to have something to go by.
Well, but you see, what you're expressing is precisely the paternalistic view of government that I object to. I don't believe government is the mother of children. I don't believe government is a father of children. I believe government is a way in which you and I and our fellow citizens achieve certain things jointly that we can't achieve separately. And I believe it is your responsibility as a mother to bring up your children in accordance with the values you believe. And I believe it's a cop-out for you to say, I want the government to do that for me.
No, but there's some... You were talking about suicides and how if you had a friend who was going to commit suicide, people who commit suicide are very lonely people. They usually don't have people to turn to. Right. So if you can help them with counseling, which the government would fund, that would save a life, which is very dear.
There are different ways to achieve that. Most counseling groups for suicides, in fact, are not financed by government money. First of all, the government doesn't have any money. Only people have money. The government only gets money by putting its hand in your pocket and taking it out. And if you believe in the desirability of a counseling agency to counsel suicides, more power to you. Get together with friends, organize it, finance it on your own. And if the government didn't take as much money out of your pockets as it does, you'd be better able to do it. It's
and also there would be fewer lonely people and less suicide.
That's right.
How am I doing, all right?
Absolutely.
I'm a slow learner, but I'm coming along.
You're getting there, Phil.
Okay.
As a citizen, you can do a great deal. As a citizen, you can exercise your influence on your congressman at the elections to try to elect people who are committed to cutting government spending.